The night of the Winterlude Gala in Ottawa, I made 3 mistakes. The first was wearing heels I hadn't broken in. The second was agreeing to go at all. The third, the one that changed everything, was signing a document I never read. I'm a physiotherapist. I work at a clinic on Elgin Street, see 8 patients a day, eat the same salad from the place on the corner every Tuesday. I'm the kind of person who double-checks that the stove is off before leaving the house. I am not by any measure the kind of person things happen to, and yet, I remember the gala in pieces, the ballroom at the Chateau Laurier, those gold ceiling lights that looked like chandeliers from another century. Mira, my coworker, pulling me toward the champagne table before we'd even found our seats. The orchestra playing something that felt like it belonged in a film I'd never seen. It was a charity event for the Ottawa Heart Institute. The kind of thing where tickets cost more than my monthly rent, and everyone seemed to know each other in the way that old money always does. Quietly, without needing to say it. I didn't want to be there. Mira had bought the tickets months earlier, and her date had cancelled that morning, some emergency with his firm in Toronto. She'd called me at 6:30, voice wound tight with forced cheerfulness, and I'd said yes because I loved her, and because I had no good reason to say no. What I remember next comes in flashes. The man at the bar who wasn't drinking. That was the thing I noticed first. Everyone else had something in their hand, and he was just standing there, watching the room with the kind of quiet attention that felt almost predatory. Tall. Dark jacket. The sort of face that looked like it had weathered something and come out the other side without apology. He caught me staring. I looked away. I remember Mira disappearing somewhere around 10 o'clock. I remember my feet hurting. I remember a woman in a blue dress handing me a glass of something sparkling that wasn't champagne and tasted faintly of elderflower. I remember the man from the bar sitting down across from me at a corner table, and I remember thinking, this is probably fine, which is something I never think. After that, nothing. Then morning. The ceiling was not mine. That was the first coherent thought I had. My ceiling has a water stain in the shape of a duck near the light fixture. This ceiling was white, smooth, vaulted, and had recessed lighting that wasn't on, but still seemed to glow faintly. Everything in the room was either cream or dark wood. The sheets I was lying in cost more than my couch. I knew this the way you know some things without knowing how you know them. I sat up slowly. I was wearing a silk nightgown, ivory. It fit me perfectly, which was somehow more unsettling than if it hadn't. I did not own a silk nightgown. I had never owned a silk nightgown. I had arrived at that gala in a navy wrap dress, and these facts were not reconcilable. There was a glass of water on the bedside table, a bottle of Advil beside it, a note. I stared at the note for a moment before I picked it up. Drink the water. Take 2 if you need them. Breakfast is on the terrace when you're ready. VV. I didn't know anyone whose name started with V. I took the Advil. I drank the water. I did not know what else to do. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows. When I found the courage to stand and cross to them, I was looking out over the Ottawa River. The city was on the other side, familiar skyline, Parliament's copper roofline going green in the cold. It was morning, early, the sky still doing that pale pink thing it does in November, just before it commits to gray. Somewhere below me, in the direction of Gatineau, a dog was barking. I was high up. This was not a condo. This was a house, or something that had decided to call itself a house, while being the size of 3 of them stacked sideways. The door to the hallway was unlocked. I found this out by trying it, which felt like a test I hadn't studied for, but passed anyway. The hallway beyond was quiet, pale hardwood floors, art on the walls that I couldn't have named, but that looked expensive and European. I followed it toward the light. The kitchen was enormous and smelled like coffee and something savory. Eggs, butter, herbs. A woman I'd never seen was moving efficiently between the counter and the stove, and she looked up when I appeared in the doorway with the calm of someone who had been expecting me. "Good morning," she said. "Mr. Vachon is on the terrace. He said to tell you there's no rush." "Mr. Vachon," I repeated. "Through there." She gestured toward a set of glass doors. I went through them because I didn't know what else to do and because I needed answers, and because the smell of coffee was the only coherent thing in my morning so far. The terrace was stone, sheltered from the wind by glass panels, and heated by something I couldn't see. There was a table set for 2, and there was the man from the bar. He looked different in the daylight. The same face, That weathered, unrepentant quality, but softer somehow. Or maybe I was just less afraid of him, now that I could see the river and the city, and evidence that the world was still where I'd left it. He was in a gray sweater, reading something on his phone, and he set it down when he heard me. "You look better than I expected," he said. "That's a low bar," I said. "Who are you?" Something moved across his face, amusement maybe, or something that wanted to be amusement but wasn't quite sure if it had permission. "Vachon," he said. "Xavier Vachon." The name landed somewhere in the back of my brain and bounced around looking for something to attach to. It found something. A name I'd heard in passing, business news, something about the Port of Montreal. A real estate development that had gone through city council amid controversy. I couldn't remember the details. I'd been eating breakfast and half listening to the radio. "Okay," I said, "and I'm here because..." He looked at me for a moment. "Sit down, please. I'd rather stand." "I know." He gestured anyway. "Sit down." I sat down. I hate that I sat down. He poured coffee into the second cup without asking. I picked it up because my hands needed something to do. "Last night," he said, "you signed a document." I set the cup down. "I beg your pardon?" "At the gala, around 11:30. A charitable contribution agreement." He was watching me carefully, the way you watch something fragile that you're not sure will hold. "It was presented to you by a woman named Lucienne Cote. You signed it." "I sign charitable contribution agreements all the time," I said, which was not true, but felt like the right thing to say. "This one," he said, "was not entirely a charitable contribution agreement." The silence that followed was the loudest I'd ever been inside. "What?" I said. "Was it entirely?" He reached into the folder on the table and slid a piece of paper across to me. I looked at it for a long time. It was dense with legal language, the kind that loops back on itself and seems designed to make you give up reading it. But the relevant section, the one Lucienne Cote had helpfully highlighted in yellow, which I was only now seeing, was not ambiguous. It was a marriage contract. My name was on it, in my own handwriting. "This isn't legal," I said. "Your lawyer can contest it," Xavier Vachon said. "You'll need a good one. You could just..." I stopped. Started again. "You could simply not enforce it, if you're a reasonable person." "I'm not particularly reasonable," he said without apparent regret. I looked at him across the table. He looked back at me. The Ottawa River glittered behind him, and the morning light was doing something unfair to his face, and I thought, "I am a physiotherapist. I live on Elgin Street. I eat the same salad every Tuesday." None of this was supposed to be my life. "Why," I said, "does a document like that even exist?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was deciding how much to tell me. "There are people," he said finally, "who want to take something from me, something significant. The terms of a trust, my grandfather's, specify that control transfers to my cousin upon my death if I remain unmarried at 38. He paused. "I turned 38 in 6 weeks. So you had a woman drugged at a charity gala and married to you by paperwork." "You weren't drugged," he said, and his voice shifted, something careful entering it. "The elderflower drink has a mild sedative in it, completely legal. It's served at events where..." He stopped. "You weren't harmed." "I woke up in someone else's nightgown," I said, "in someone else's house, married to someone I've never met. Define harmed for me." He had the grace to look, briefly, like he'd been caught at something. "The nightgown was Lucienne's doing," he said. "Your dress was ruined. You spilled an entire glass of wine on yourself around midnight," she thought. "She thought wrong," I said. Another silence. Longer this time. "What is it they want to take?" I asked. "The cousin." He looked at me like he was reassessing something. "My grandfather built the Vachon Group from a trucking company in Trois-Rivières," he said. 40 years, 32 subsidiaries, contracts across 3 provinces. My cousin Renaud has been waiting for me to make a mistake since I was 19 years old, and not getting married is the mistake. According to the trust, yes." I looked down at the paper again. My name, my signature, the date. The notary seal, which meant there had been a notary present at 11:30 at the Chateau Laurier, while I was apparently signing things in a state that involved elderflower and bad decisions. "Where is my dress?" I said. "Downstairs, laundered, and my phone, charging in the bedroom. You can check." I didn't touch it. I believed him. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because a man who went to this much trouble to arrange a legal document would not need to go through someone's phone. Or maybe because there was something in the way he said it. Flat, certain, that didn't have the texture of lying. I want to call someone, I said. Of course, and I want a copy of that document, already printed. He slid a second folder across the table. I picked up both folders. I stood up. My feet hurt less than they had last night, which felt like a small, absurd victory. I'm going to need you to understand something, I said. I am not your wife. I am a woman who signed a piece of paper while impaired at an event I attended as a favor to a friend. Whatever this is, I gestured at the river, the terrace, the house, all of it. I am not part of it. I know, he said. I stopped. You know. I know what you are and what you're not, he said. I'm not under any illusion that last night was a love story. He picked up his coffee. He didn't look away from me, but the document exists, and Renaud already knows about it. How? Because Lucienne Côté works for him. A pause. She's been working for him for 2 years. I found out last night, approximately 30 minutes after you signed the contract. I sat back down. I didn't mean to. My legs just made the decision independently. So, I said slowly, your plan to protect the trust by marrying a stranger was compromised before it began, he said. Yes, and now Renaud knows you have a wife on paper. Yes, which means if I leave and contest the document, he knows it wasn't real. He already suspects. The question is whether he can prove it. I pressed my fingers against my temples. I'm good at puzzles. Not because I'm brilliant, but because I'm stubborn, because I sit with things until they make sense. And this was starting, against my better instincts, to make a kind of horrible sense. What do you want from me? I said. 3 months, he said. Appear with me publicly 4 or 5 times. Nothing extreme. Dinners. 1 event in Montreal. By then I'll have restructured the trust through the courts and Renaud won't have anything to stand on. And in exchange, he named a number. I had been a physiotherapist for 6 years. I had student loans from Queens. I had a car that needed new brakes and a ceiling with a water stain shaped like a duck. I had a lease renewal coming up in February that I was not sure I could afford. The number he named was exactly twice my annual salary. I'm not interested in your money, I said. I know, he said, but you will be. Everyone is eventually. It's not an insult, it's just true. I wanted to disagree with him. I couldn't find the words. I want to speak to a lawyer, I said. I'll arrange it this afternoon if you'd like. Independent counsel. Not mine. I want my own. Fine. And I want it in writing. All of it. What you're asking for, what you're offering, the timeline, the conditions. I expected that, he said. And you owe me a new pair of heels, I said. Mine have a crack in the left one. Something happened to his face. The amusement again. But this time it got permission. Kincaid, he said. What? Your last name. I've been trying to decide what to call you. You can call me Lena, I said, before I thought about it. Then I wished I hadn't said it. Then I decided it didn't matter. Lena, he said, like he was testing how it fit. Don't make it weird, I said. My lawyer, a woman named Sandra who I found through a friend of a friend, and who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent, read the document twice, asked me 6 questions I didn't expect, and told me 3 things. The first was that the document was legal, irregular, but legal. The notary was licensed, and the signature was mine. The second was that contesting it would take a minimum of 4 months, and cost me more in legal fees than I had in savings. The third was that Xavier Vachon's offer, if honored, was the cleanest exit available to me. You don't have to do it, Sandra said, but I want you to understand that doing it is not the worst outcome here. What's the worst outcome? Renaud Vachon, she said, is the kind of person who litigates everything. If he decides to make your life difficult, he can. Not because he'll win, just because he can afford to make the process expensive for you. I drove home in my laundered dress with my cracked heels and a folder full of documents, and sat in my apartment for an hour, looking at the water stain on my ceiling, Mira called. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to explain. I called Xavier Vachon at 4 in the afternoon. 1 condition, I said when he picked up. A pause. What is it? My cat, I said. I have a 14-year-old cat named Biscotti. If anything happens to my apartment, my routines, my ability to get home and feed that cat on a reasonable schedule, the deal is off. Another pause. Longer. The cat is non-negotiable, he said, and I could not entirely tell if he was laughing. The cat is completely non-negotiable, I confirmed. Fine, he said. Biscotti stays. The first dinner was at a restaurant in Westboro. I'd walked past 100 times and never gone into because the menu wasn't posted outside and I've always found that slightly sinister. It was a Tuesday, which meant I'd rescheduled my salad. Xavier was already there when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, which I hadn't expected, and pulled out my chair, which I also hadn't expected, and it took me a moment to recalibrate. "You look," he started. "Don't," I said. He didn't. He sat back down and passed me the menu. It was good food. A tasting menu, the kind where you don't order so much as submit to whoever's in charge of the kitchen that night. There was a venison tartare and a squash bisque, and something with sable fish and a citrus beurre blanc that made me temporarily forget I was a relationship for a restaurant full of people who might know Xavier Vachon. We talked, carefully at first. He asked me about physiotherapy, and I answered in a way that was honest but contained. And then he started asking better questions, and I started answering them properly. And somewhere around the third course, I realized I was actually talking to him the way I talk to people. I find interesting. I didn't like that. "How long have you been in Ottawa?" I asked to redirect. 12 years, he said. "Came from Montreal for a deal that was supposed to take 6 months. What happened?" "I bought a house," he said. "It seemed like a reasonable thing to do at the time. The house on the river." "Yes, it's extraordinary," I said, which was true and which I hadn't meant to say out loud. He looked at me. "You can say so without it meaning anything." "I know," I said. "I just didn't expect to." We were quiet for a moment. Outside, the November street was doing its thing. People moving quickly against the cold, breath visible. The particular November in Ottawa, quality of everyone being slightly annoyed at the weather and slightly proud of enduring it. "Tell me about your grandfather," I said. "The one with the trust." He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. "He was a truck driver who became something else," Xavier said finally. "He used to say the company was built on 2 things, fiability and stubbornness. Reliability. He drove the same route for 11 years before he bought his first truck. Then he bought another. Then he started hiring people who reminded him of himself." A pause. "He died 6 years ago. He left everything he built to the family, but he put conditions on it because he didn't entirely trust the family." "Smart man," I said. "Infuriating man," Xavier said. But he said it with something that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, and was probably both. "And Renaud? My father's brother's son." He picked up his wine, something from the eastern townships, a Pinot Noir that the sommelier had poured with quiet authority. "He's not a bad person. He's just been waiting for something for a very long time, and waiting does things to people." "What does he do with it if he gets it?" "Sells," Xavier said simply. "Restructures. Takes the pieces apart and sells them to larger entities. The employees, most of them have been with the company for decades. Some of them knew my grandfather. Renaud doesn't see that, he sees assets." I thought about that for a moment. "So this isn't just about you," I said. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, not the amusement this time, something more careful. "No," he said. "It's not just about me." The weeks that followed were strange in the way that new things are strange. Unfamiliar at the edges, but increasingly, unsettlingly comfortable at the center. We had dinner twice more, a reception at the Knack, where I met people whose names I recognized from news headlines, and who looked at me with the precise calibrated interest of people trying to assess what I was and what I meant. Xavier introduced me simply, Lena, and let the ambiguity work for itself. At one point, a woman in a red dress leaned in and asked how we'd met, and I said at the Chateau Laurier without technically lying, and Xavier, who was close enough to hear, did not visibly react. He texted sometimes, never about the arrangement, just things, a link to an article about new research in manual therapy, a photo of the river from his terrace at 6 in the morning when the ice was starting to form. Once, on a Thursday, "Biscotti, okay?" I sent back a photo of Biscotti sitting on my work laptop with profound feline indifference. He sent back a single laughing emoji. It was the first emoji I had ever received from him, and it felt unreasonably like a significant event. The Montreal trip was in week 5. One night, a dinner with 4 of his grandfather's longest-standing business partners. Men and women in their 60s and 70s who remembered the company when it had 12 trucks and a dispatcher named Gilles, who worked out of a converted garage in Shawinigan. I expected to feel like a prop. What happened instead was that a woman named Monique, who had known Xavier's grandfather for 30 years and had his photograph on her office wall, sat across from me at dinner, and told me a story about a blizzard in 1987 and a convoy that shouldn't have made it through, and did anyway because of what she called le têtu vachon, the vachon stubbornness, and I listened to every word and forgot, for stretches of an hour, why I was there. Afterward, in the car back to the hotel, Xavier said, "Monique liked you. She's remarkable," I said. "She's the one who called me when she found out about Renaud's plan. She said he stopped." "What?" "She said that whoever I brought tonight would tell her everything she needed to know." A pause. "About me, about what kind of person I've become." I looked out the window at the Montreal skyline, the St. Lawrence wide and dark below us. "What do you think?" she concluded, I asked. "She told me just before we left," he said. She said. He switched to French without seeming to notice the way people do when the words that matter come from somewhere deep. Elle pose les bonnes questions, garde-la. She asks the right questions, keep her. I did not say anything for a long time. "Xavier," I said finally. "Don't," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything. I know." He was watching the road. "That's what concerns me." The trust restructuring came through in week 9. Sandra called me on a Wednesday morning while I was between patients, her voice carrying the particular quality of professional satisfaction contained behind professional neutrality. "It's done," she said. "Filed yesterday, approved this morning. The marriage clause is severed from the succession terms. Mr. Vachon's ownership is no longer contingent on marital status." I sat in the hallway outside my treatment room for a moment. "And the document?" I asked. "The marriage contract?" "Both parties can now petition for annulment," she said. "Given the circumstances of signing, it would be unopposed. A formality. A formality." I thanked her. I went back in to see my next patient, a woman in her 50s with a frozen shoulder who always brought homemade butter tarts on Wednesdays and asked me questions about my life that I deflected cheerfully. She set the tarts on the counter and asked how I was doing, and I said, "Fine, great, busy," and she looked at me the way perceptive women in their 50s look at you, when they know fine, great, boozy is not the whole story. I called Xavier that evening. "Sandra called," I said. "I know. My lawyer confirmed this morning." A pause, longer than our pauses usually were. "So," I said. "So," he said. "I suppose, Lena." His voice was different, not careful, not measured. Something else. Something I hadn't heard from him before. "Have dinner with me." "We've had dinner," I said. "Not like the others," he said. "Not for anyone else." I looked at Biscotti. He was sitting on the windowsill watching the street with the philosophical detachment of a creature who has decided that whatever happens next is fine with him. "Xavier," I said. "Don't tell me it's a terrible idea," he said. "I'm aware that it's a terrible idea." "It's not a terrible idea," I said, and surprised us both. "That's the problem." He was quiet. "I spent 9 weeks," I said, "trying to remember that this was an arrangement, a contract, something I got into by accident and was getting out of responsibly." I stopped. "And then you sent me a photo of the river at 6 in the morning and asked about my cat and introduced me to Monique, and I realized I've been doing it wrong." "Doing what wrong?" "Keeping score," I said. "Keeping track of what's real and what isn't. As if those are different things." Outside my window, the Ottawa street was doing its November thing. Somewhere across the city, in a house on the river, Xavier Vachon was probably doing the same thing I was, standing still in a space that had become unexpectedly important, trying to decide what to do with that. "The restaurant on Elgin," he said. "The one you walk past on your way to work." I laughed. I hadn't expected to. "You did research." "I noticed things," he said. "Friday, 7 o'clock. I'll think about it," I said. "You've already decided," he said. He wasn't wrong. I looked at Biscotti one more time. He had turned away from the window and was watching me with the expression cats get when they have known something for weeks, and are mildly insulted. "You're only figuring it out now." "Friday," I said. "Friday," he said, and hung up before either of us could second-guess it. Outside, the first real snow of the season had started, the kind that comes in sideways on a wind off the river, the kind that sticks. Ottawa doing what Ottawa does. Quietly, stubbornly, without apology. I stood at the window for a long time, watching it fall, and thought, this was not supposed to be my life. Then I thought, maybe that's the point.